Okay, in this chapter we are going to discuss the recommended steps to business analysis. The executive sponsors and business people put together an initial project request, right? So when they decide that there's an issue that they need to have resolved, an update to a current application, maybe some new functionality that needs to be put in it, or a new application altogether, for whatever reason, there's a problem for the business that they need to get resolved, right? So that's where the project request initially comes from. And the BA may be involved during or after this step. So occasionally you may be asked to help put together the documentation for the initial project. I will tell you that in most cases, I've not been. I've only been involved in that a couple of times. Usually, I'm not involved at that point. But I just want to put that in there so that there's the possibility that you would be asked to be involved in that part of the process. The BA reviews the available documentation and begins by asking high-level questions. So this is where you get that project overview or project charter or what have you, and you start trying to figure out a little bit at a very high level. You're not getting into requirements here, but you're just trying to ask some questions to get a little bit more information, to have a little better idea of what the project is about. And then the BA and the project manager work with the stakeholders to document the project scope. Again, you may or may not be involved in that. Most of the time I've been given what the project scope is. I wasn't involved in determining what that scope was, but you may be asked to do that, so I'm including that here. And within that would be the objectives, the statement of purpose, the problem statement, risks and issues. You may be asked to do a context level data flow diagram that shows the external agents and data flows, so meaning the other systems applications that would interact with the particular one that you are working on. You would show how data might flow between those different areas. So for example, if your project were building a website for a company to do online sales, think about Amazon, right? You would have your online application where customers could make their orders, but then there would be data that would flow to like the inventory system, the shipping system, those types of things. So there would be some data flow back and forth between those different areas. The fourth thing on the list here is meet with stakeholders to verify and validate the project initiation. Again, that the PM most likely is the person to do that, but I wanted you to be aware that you may be asked to do that. And then planning the analysis work. You should definitely be involved in the planning for the analysis work because that's the bulk of your work is in the analysis phase. So you want to make sure that you are giving your input to the project plan for the analysis phase on how many different requirement sessions you think you need to have and how much time you'll need to have to do them. And the other thing that you always want to keep in mind is it's not just the requirement sessions, right? You have to do something with that information that you get in those after that. So you want to make sure you include time in your project plan for actually documenting what comes out of those meetings. Elicit detailed requirements. This, of course, is where you start having those requirement sessions or interviews or however it is that you, whatever elicitation technique you determine to use, this is the point where that would be done. And then you would identify and document the core business component. So that's processes, the data, the business rules, and the external agents. All of those things are part of your requirements that you'll be documenting. You would also want to create a comprehensive glossary of terms. So, and I see here I have a typo. This says terms. We're going to make that terms. So you would, every company has their own acronyms, right? So you want to make sure that you document those acronyms in the glossary of terms and also any specific actual terms that you want to make sure that everybody knows the definition to. So it may not necessarily be an acronym, but just a term that you want to define. So all of that would go in that glossary. You're going to, of course, elicit requirements on both the processes and the data. So that goes back here to our list in 7. You want to make sure that you're not just getting the processes, but you're talking about the data that's involved in those processes. So for example, if you were documenting the requirements for a login screen, you would want to make sure that you document what data is needed for that. Is it just a login ID and a password? Is there other other things besides that? Maybe there's a third field, another type of ID identification field, and then you wanted to talk about what that data looks like for the login ID and the password. So how many characters can it be? What type of characters can it be? Is it only alpha characters for the ID, or is it alpha and numeric? Those kind of things are what I'm talking about when I say data that you have to define. And then number 10 is double check for missing requirements by linking data requirements to process requirements. So this is an excellent way of knowing that you have, it's kind of like doing a requirements trace matrix where you trace the test scripts to the requirements to make sure that you have coverage in testing for all of your requirements. You also want to do kind of a trace to make sure that you have data for all of the requirements that you have, because every requirement is going to have some sort of data behind it. So you'd want to do a check for that as well. And number 11, once the business requirements are complete, you will work with the business stakeholders and technical team to help them design a solution. That does not mean you are designing the solution. That is for the technical team to do, but you want to be there to assist them when they have questions about the requirements. Your role is really more of a consultant type of role in this part of the process. You want to be there to help them to get answers to their questions, but you're not doing the design work. And also something to remember, when you are eliciting the requirements, don't consider that a methodical process. You'll get some requirements for one area, you're going to miss a few, you're going to go on to another area, you're going to realize that something new came up for a previous area, you're going to go back and put that in there. You're going to discover in one, oops, we forgot to talk about this in the last one, and you're going to go back to that. So it's definitely a kind of an iterative process with your requirements, where you're constantly going back and refining, changing, adding, what have you, to the requirements that you've already done, until, of course, you get to the point where you have had all of your sessions and have completed everything. But up to that point, you're going to be going back and forth with them through the ones that you've already gotten. So don't feel like when you finish a section that you're really finished, because you're not. It's going to come back again, and you're going to make updates through it as you're talking through requirements for other areas. A requirement may be very broad, very specific, or something in between, right? You're going to start out with high-level requirements, and you're going to get down to detailed requirements. So an example of a high-level requirement would be, our payroll system must have direct deposit and paycheck options. And that's perfectly acceptable as a high-level requirement. When you're first starting out getting your requirements, that's a good high-level requirement. Then you can start talking about that one to get down to the details of it. An example of a detailed requirement is the employee ID number should be 6 digits and assigned sequentially based on the employee's original hire date. So see how detailed that is? You've pretty much got everything you need on that one, right? There isn't anything that's left up to assumption when you read that requirement, and that's what you want to think about when you get a requirement. If there's anywhere where there's a question or where you would have to make an assumption, then you know that it's not detailed enough. So think about it in those terms when you're looking at, do I have enough details in my requirements? Complete requirements. Make sure the requirement describes completely the user task and information required to support the task. Focusing on system functionality versus what needs to be accomplished can lead to incomplete requirements. So here's an example. We must be able to change an employee's profile information. If we don't specify the individual components of the employee profile, then that requirement is not complete. So think about that requirement. We must be able to change an employee's profile information. Immediately that made me think, what is the profile information? And what do you mean by change, right? Can you change every single field in the profile? Can you only change certain ones? Can you delete information? Can you add information? Or can you literally only change what's already there? To make this requirement complete, you could say, we must be able to change the employee last name, first name, middle initial, street address, city, state, zip code, marital status, and/or withholding parameters. So that tells you the things that you need to be able to change, right? It's much more specific. Correct requirements. The requirements should be appropriate to meet the goals of the project and accurately describe the user's expectations of the functionality. Here's an example. Employees only change their name when their address or their marital status changes. So someone who is not familiar with the business area may have assumed that requirement. Clearly, that requirement is incorrect and must be changed. The correct example would be, employees may change their name in the payroll system by providing the appropriate legal proof of the change. The change may come with a change in marital status, address, withholding parameters, or may be made alone. So this tells you what things can be changed in conjunction, what can be changed on its own, and the fact that there is a business rule here that they have to have legal proof of the change. So that is a correct requirement. Unambiguous requirements. Requirements should be written so that all readers will arrive at a single consistent interpretation. Ambiguous requirements can result in the wrong system being developed and may not be found during testing due to the incorrect interpretation of the requirement, right? You don't even know when you're testing it that's wrong because you've interpreted it that way. Here's an example. Employees are not allowed to work for more than 80 hours in 1 week. Not allowed is ambiguous. Are they physically removed from the work environment, or are they not paid for any hours over 80? Here's an example of how you can make that a little less ambiguous. Employee time worked. The time worked is recorded in hours. The smallest increment recorded is 0.25 of an hour. If an employee reports more than 80 hours in a 7-day period, a warning is provided to the supervisor and the payment is held for approval. So what we're saying here is clearly how you record the hour, what increments you record it in, and the fact that an employee can in fact report hours over 80, but the supervisor is going to have to approve it before they actually get paid for those hours. Verifiable requirements. Each requirement should be testable and verifiable. An example, the system should be easy to use. That requirement is impossible to test since every user will have a different opinion about what is easy and what is not, right? So here's an example that would be a more verifiable requirement. A novice user, meaning a new user, must be able to add a new employee to the payroll system within 10 minutes. An experienced user must be able to change an employee's withholding parameters within 3 minutes. Those things that are absolutely verifiable. Necessary requirements. Requirements must be necessary and clearly support one of the original project goals or objectives. Example, we should be able to enter the employee eye color. This is a great example of a time when the BA needs to ask the why question. Is this requirement necessary? Do they truly need to know that their employee's eye color is brown or blue or green or whatever? What's the reason for needing to know the employee eye color? Is it just something that they've always gotten from employees, so they just keep doing it? Or is there an actual purpose? Is there a need for the eye color? If there's some sort of high security place and they do some kind of retina check to verify that you really are the person entering a secure area, then okay, employee eye color is probably needed. But if you're working at a regular company that doesn't have that level of security, eye color is probably not needed. But it's one of those things where you need to ask the why. to find out why they're collecting it before you either assume that you need to continue collecting it or assume that you don't. Just ask. Feasible requirements. The business analyst must be sure that all requirements are technologically possible for a reasonable cost. Example: the system should automatically be updated when the government changes the withholding parameter criteria. Although this requirement may be technologically feasible, it would involve a complex interface with an outside organization and may be very expensive. Is it truly a critical requirement? So rather than saying the system has to automatically update when the government makes changes, maybe there's a different way of handling it instead of having that, that interface with an outside organization, especially since that outside organization is the government, right? Could be a very expensive process. So again, need to talk and discuss that instead of just assuming that it's truly required. Prioritized requirements. Each requirement should be prioritized. Some organizations require one of the following phrases in each requirement: must have, should have, could have. If you say the system must have blah, right, then you know that that is a must-have requirement. It absolutely has to be included. If it says could have, then you know that's one of those optional requirements that if you're running into a time constraint, a resource constraint, a money constraint, any of those things, and the things that say could have are the things that you could drop from this this initial project and hold them for a later release, an upgrade to the application. So some organizations require that phrase be included in the requirements. All right, that is it for this topic.